That old photograph in the teacher's lounge had been there for years. Nobody ever paid attention to it. But when Sarah was cleaning and accidentally knocked the photo to the floor and saw what was written on the back, learning who Principal Jackson really was would take just one internet search. Welcome to Human Stories. Before we begin this story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they never fade away. Chapter 1. An Ordinary Principal. The hallways of Riverside High School came alive every morning with the same sounds. Students rushing, lockers slamming, teachers calling out, "Don't be late" warnings. And of course, the measured footsteps of Principal Daniel Jackson. Jackson was 52 years old, medium height, always impeccably dressed. Navy blue suit, white shirt, and his tie always positioned in exactly the same spot. His hair was gray but well-maintained. Deep lines marked his face, as if the years had worn him down more than they should have. He'd been principal of this school for 15 years, disciplined, fair, but cold. He rarely spoke with students, and with teachers only discussed necessary business. At school meetings, he always sat in the same corner, took notes, but seldom spoke. The teachers called him the robot. Emma, the math teacher, would say, "I've worked here for 15 years and I've never seen him laugh." Mike, the PE teacher, complained, "It's like he's constantly on guard duty, never relaxes." But the one most curious about Jackson was Sarah Thompson. At 28, she was a young English teacher. She'd been assigned to this school 2 years ago and had been observing Principal Jackson's behavior since day one. Sarah had noticed that Jackson arrived at school every morning at exactly 7:15. Never late, never early either. When he got out of his car, he would scan the surroundings as if expecting danger. He would tour every floor of the school at least twice a day. This wasn't just routine inspection. It was more like a security sweep. Jackson's office was peculiar too. His desk was always organized, files arranged alphabetically. The walls displayed diplomas and achievement certificates, but no personal photographs. No one knew if he had a family. Was he married? Did he have children? Where did he live? Nobody could answer these questions. Unlike other teachers, Sarah didn't find Jackson boring. On the contrary, she thought there was a story behind his silence. Sometimes during meetings, she would watch Jackson, how he held his hands when speaking, the position of his feet, how his eyes were constantly moving. These weren't the behaviors of an ordinary educator. One afternoon, Sarah was preparing lessons in the teacher's lounge. The desks were messy. Teachers had gone home. The school had grown quiet. Sarah stood up, and as she reached for something, the old photo frame on the edge of the desk fell to the floor. The glass didn't break, but the frame opened. When Sarah bent down to pick up the frame, she saw writing on the back of the photograph. Faded, written in pencil. Operation Silent Storm, Team Alpha, Afghanistan, 2005. Sarah's heart raced. She turned the photo over and looked. It was a black and white blurry photograph. 5 men, military uniforms in what looked like desert terrain, and the man on the left. Sarah's breath caught. This young man was Principal Jackson, 15 years younger. Chapter 2. The investigation begins that night when Sarah went home. She couldn't rest easy. The image from the photograph wouldn't leave her mind. Did Jackson have a military background that nobody knew about? Why was this being kept secret? She opened her laptop and typed, "Operation Silent Storm Afghanistan 2005. The initial search didn't reveal much, just general military operation information. But when she searched more specifically, she found information in some military forums and old news archives. In 2005, a special operation had been conducted in Afghanistan. The details were mostly classified, but some sources mentioned it. A 5-person special team had conducted an infiltration operation in a region where Taliban leaders were hiding. The operation was very dangerous, and only experienced Special Forces members were selected. The deeper Sarah dug, the less information she found. This wasn't normal. Usually at least basic information about military operations could be found. But there was almost nothing about this operation. The next day when she came to school, Sarah looked at Jackson with different eyes. She reassessed his way of walking, his posture, his manner of speaking. Now she understood. Jackson's disciplined stance, his constant alertness, his scanning of the environment. These weren't just the habits of a meticulous principal. When lunchtime came, Sarah went to the teacher's lounge. She had put the photograph back in its original place, but now she looked at it with completely different eyes. Other teachers continued their normal lives, but Sarah's mind was always on Jackson. Emma, the math teacher, sat next to her. "Sarah, you seem distracted today. Is there a problem?" Sarah hesitated. Should she share what she'd found? "Emma, how well do you know Jackson?" "Jackson? We've worked together for 10 years, but I'd say I don't know him at all." "Why do you ask? Don't you ever wonder about his background? Where he came from, what he did before?" Emma shrugged. "I think he was a principal at some former military school. Where else do you think that discipline comes from? But nobody discusses his private life. He doesn't share either." When Sarah heard the words former military school, she thought about it. Maybe there was some truth in Emma's guess. But the photograph Sarah had found told a very different story. That afternoon, Sarah decided to go to Jackson's office. She knocked on his door. "Come in." Jackson's voice was, as always, calm, controlled. Sarah entered. Jackson was sitting at his desk, reviewing some documents. He looked up. "Sarah, how can I help you?" "Principal Jackson, one of the students asked a question about you. I was curious. What did you do before becoming an educator?" Jackson's face didn't change, but Sarah noticed something in his eyes. For a very brief moment, it was as if a door cracked open and immediately closed again. "I did various jobs, Sarah. What matters is that I'm here now and doing my best for our students. Is there another issue?" This polite but distant response only increased Sarah's curiosity. Jackson was hiding something, and now Sarah knew this for certain. Chapter 3. The Truth Emerges. When the weekend came, Sarah went to the local library to continue her research. She wanted to examine old newspaper archives. She scanned military news from 2005 to 2006. After hours of searching, she found a small news snippet, dated March 15, 2006. Headline, "Special Forces Team Members Missing in Afghanistan Rescued." The article read, 3 members of a 5-person Special Forces team captured by Taliban forces last month have been rescued. 2 soldiers were killed during the operation, and 3 soldiers were severely wounded. The names of the rescued soldiers were not disclosed for security reasons. The team was on a classified mission codenamed Operation Silent Storm. Sarah's hands trembled. This was the operation from the photograph, and Jackson was on that team. So he had been captured too, so he had been rescued too. What about the 2 who died? Did Jackson know them? Maybe. They were close friends. When Sarah went to school on Monday morning, she looked at Jackson with completely different eyes. Now she understood his silence, his introversion. He wasn't just a former soldier. He was a man who had lost friends in war, been captured, maybe experienced very difficult things. Even while teaching that day, her mind was on Jackson. The students didn't notice anything, but Sarah's concentration was difficult. When lunchtime came, Sarah passed by Jackson's office. The door was open and Jackson was on the phone. His voice was more tense than usual. "No, those files absolutely cannot be disclosed. Yes, I understand, but rules are rules. Nobody knows I'm here. It has to stay that way." Sarah quickly passed by. This conversation also strengthened her suspicions. Was Jackson still connected to classified operations? Or did he just want his past to remain secret? After school, Sarah decided to follow Jackson's car. She knew it wasn't ethical, but her curiosity was too strong. Jackson left the city center and went to a quieter area. He stopped at a small, modest house. Sarah watched from a distance. Jackson got out of the car, checked his surroundings, and entered the house. The house looked very plain. The garden was clean but without decoration. The windows were covered with dark curtains. When Sarah approached the house, she saw Jackson working in his garden. But he wasn't doing normal garden work. He was working on some metal objects with tools in his hands. Sarah wanted to look more closely. Just then, Jackson looked up and saw Sarah. They looked at each other. Sarah's heart raced. She'd been caught. Jackson put down the tool he was holding and walked toward Sarah. There was no anger on his face, but Sarah was a little afraid of him. "Sarah," he said in a calm voice, "what are you doing here?" Sarah stammered a response. I'm sorry, Principal Jackson. I was curious and..." "Come inside," Jackson said. "We need to talk." Chapter 4. The Big Revelation. Jackson's house was much more interesting inside. The walls were plain, but there were a few military photographs. The chairs were comfortable but organized. The most striking thing was the map on the wall. Various regions of the world were marked. After seating Sarah, Jackson sat across from her. "Sarah, you're a very curious teacher, but some things shouldn't be curious about. Principal Jackson, I wanted to get to know you. In the photograph..." "What photograph?" Jackson's voice hardened. Sarah hesitated, but decided to tell the truth. "The photograph in the teacher's lounge. It fell to the floor and I saw the back. Operation Silent Storm... Jackson took a deep breath. There was a long silence. Then he got up and brought 2 glasses of tea from the kitchen. "Sarah, have you told anyone about this?" "No, only I know." Jackson sat down and looked at Sarah. There was fatigue in his eyes, as if he was preparing to share a burden he'd carried for years. "I'm going to tell you a story, Sarah, but this story won't leave this room. Agreed?" Sarah nodded. "In 2005, I worked in Special Forces. My rank was lieutenant. We were a 5-person special team. Our name was Team Alpha. Our mission was to find where Taliban leaders were hiding and capture them if necessary." Jackson paused, took a sip of his tea. "Operation Silent Storm was the most difficult operation of my career. We needed to find a Taliban camp hidden in a mountainous region of Afghanistan, in a very dangerous area. It was supposed to be a 2-week operation." Sarah listened, holding her breath. "The first week, everything went according to plan. We found the camp, took photographs, determined coordinates. But the second week, everything went wrong. They captured us." Jackson's voice trembled. "We were prisoners for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Sarah, in war, the worst thing isn't being killed. The worst thing is watching your friends being tortured in front of your eyes and not being able to help them." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We had our team leader, Marcus. He was my best friend. Even there, under those conditions, he tried to keep our morale high. One day they took him away and never brought him back." Jackson stood up and went toward the window. "Then they took David. He was 22 years old, had just gotten married. His wife was pregnant. We lost him too." "When you were rescued, only 3 people remained," Sarah whispered. "Yes, me, Rodriguez, and Thompson were rescued, but none of us could return to who we were before. Rodriguez committed suicide 2 years later. Thompson became an alcoholic, and Jackson turned to Sarah. "I ran away. From life, from people, from everything. I left the military, changed cities, changed my name. Daniel Jackson isn't my real name." Sarah was shocked. "So what's your real name?" "That doesn't matter, Sarah. What matters is that I left that man behind. Now I'm just a school principal. someone trying to look after children, ensuring they're safe. Sarah understood. Jackson's overprotective attitude, his constant alertness, his control of the school, all of this was part of his PTSD. Principal Jackson, so why do you keep this photograph? Jackson smiled, a real smile for the first time. Because I don't want to forget Marcus and David. They were heroes, but I can't share their story with anyone, because that operation is still classified, and I'm just trying to live. Sarah went to Jackson's side. You're a hero too. A hero who protects the children in this school every day, even though they don't realize it. Jackson nodded. Sarah, our conversation will stay between us, right? Of course. But I want to ask something. Ask. Have you ever regretted it? Becoming a teacher? Jackson looked out the window, watching the street where students were going home. No, Sarah. Protecting these children, providing them with a safe environment, this is therapy for me. I want these children to live the life that Marcus and David couldn't. When Sarah left Jackson's house that day, she had much more respect for him. He wasn't just a boring principal. He was a man carrying the pain of the past, but looking toward the future with hope. Chapter 5. Changing relationships. From the next day on, the relationship between Sarah and Jackson changed. Sarah now better understood Jackson's behaviors. His coming early in the morning, staying late in the evening, his protective attitude towards students. All of these had a deep reason underneath. One day, there was a small accident at school. One of the students had fallen down the stairs and sprained his ankle. While other teachers panicked, Jackson remained very calm. He immediately applied first aid, called an ambulance, and calmed the student. Sarah watched the professionalism Jackson showed in this situation. It was clear that he wasn't just a school principal, but also someone with medical training. After the ambulance arrived, Sarah approached Jackson. You were very professional. Do you also have medical training? Jackson smiled. Part of military training. You need to be able to help your friends in field conditions. Sarah nodded. She was learning new things about Jackson every day. As weeks passed, Sarah began to see Jackson's presence in the school with different eyes. His strict rules, discipline, security measures. These no longer seemed boring, but protective. One day during a teacher's meeting, Emma complained, Jackson is too strict. He should be a little more tolerant with students. Sarah remained silent but wanted to defend Jackson inside. Emma didn't know what a selfless person Jackson really was. When the meeting ended, Sarah went to Jackson. Principal Jackson, do you have a few minutes? Sure, Sarah. Go ahead. They went to his office. Sarah sat down and asked gently, Jackson, have you ever thought, about sharing your past? Jackson frowned. What do you mean? What I mean is, you have very valuable experiences, maybe with students on some topics. No, Sarah. Jackson's voice was stern. War stories aren't things to tell children. Sarah nodded understandingly. Of course I don't mean war stories, but leadership, resilience, teamwork. It's clear you're very experienced in these areas. Jackson stopped and thought. Maybe you're right, Sarah, but I need to be very careful. Chapter 6. New Beginnings. A few days later, Jackson called Sarah to his office. Sarah, I thought about your suggestion. Maybe I can discuss some topics with students, but I'll need your help. Sarah nodded joyfully. Of course, how can I help? We can organize a seminar on leadership and teamwork. You as an English teacher and I can share my experiences. Sarah was excited. That's a great idea. They began planning the seminar. Jackson would share his experiences on teamwork and leadership without going into war details. When the seminar day came, about 50 students gathered in the school auditorium. When Jackson took the stage, he was a bit nervous, but Sarah sent him an encouraging smile. "Hello, young people," Jackson said. "Today we're going to talk about leadership and teamwork." The students were a bit surprised. They had never seen Principal Jackson speak so openly. Jackson began to speak. "One of the most important things in life is being able to trust your teammates when you face difficulties. During my working period, the only reason I survived was the people beside me." The students listened attentively. Real leadership isn't running in front. Real leadership is lifting your friends when they fall, encouraging them when they're scared, giving them strength when they want to give up. Jackson's voice was strong and sincere. And most importantly, real strength isn't in physical power, but in mental resilience. When you face difficulties, giving up is the easiest path. But continuing to fight, that's when you show your true character. At the end of the seminar, students looked at Jackson with very different eyes. He was no longer just a strict principal, but had become an experienced and knowledgeable mentor. Sarah went to Jackson after the seminar. "You were wonderful. The students were very impressed with you." Jackson smiled. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad I followed your suggestion." "You know," Sarah said, "maybe you don't have to completely hide your past. Of course, you don't have to share the details, but are you saying my experiences are valuable?" "Absolutely. You're not just a school principal. You're also a life coach, a mentor, a hero." Jackson looked at Sarah for a long time. "Sarah, I'm very fortunate to have met you. You showed me that my past doesn't have to be a source of shame, but can actually be a source of strength." Sarah smiled. "This is your achievement. I just noticed." Chapter 7. The Big Surprise. A month later, an unexpected visitor came to school. When Sarah heard the call from the secretary, she ran toward Jackson's office. "Sarah," the secretary said, "Principal Jackson urgently wants to see you." When Sarah entered the office, she found Jackson talking with two men. One was a middle-aged, uniformed officer. The other was in civilian clothes but had a military posture. Jackson stood up when he saw Sarah. "Sarah, I want to introduce you to some people. This is Colonel Williams and this is..." The man in civilian clothes stepped forward. "I'm Thompson. I served in the same team with Rodriguez. With the same team." Sarah's breath caught. This was Thompson that Jackson had mentioned, one of the three people who were rescued. Thompson turned to Jackson. "Daniel, it took me 5 years to find you. Why did you disappear?" Jackson remained silent. Colonel Williams intervened. "Mr. Jackson, your story has reached the Pentagon, especially the work you've done here, the connection you've established with young people." "What do you mean?" Jackson asked. "We need experienced people like you for the training of young soldiers. Of course, if you want." Sarah saw the confusion on Jackson's face. "I'm not a soldier anymore," Jackson said. "I'm an educator." Thompson smiled. "Daniel, you're very successful as an educator, but you don't have to share your experiences only with the children in this school." Colonel Williams explained. "What we're offering you isn't a full-time position. 1 day a week, supporting leadership and teamwork training for newly graduated soldiers." Jackson looked at Sarah. I don't know. I've been away from that world for a long time." Sarah went to Jackson's side. "Jackson, the decision is yours. But know this, whatever you decide, I'll support you." Thompson approached Jackson. "Daniel, think about Marcus and David's memory. They would want young soldiers to return home safely, too." These words deeply affected Jackson. There was a long silence. "As long as it doesn't interfere with my work at school," he said finally, "I can come 1 day a week." Colonel Williams nodded joyfully. "Accepted." Chapter 8. Full Circle. 3 months later, Jackson was giving training both at school and at the military base. Sarah observed this change and saw how happy he was. One day, Jackson invited Sarah to a special event. "Sarah, tomorrow is the graduation ceremony for young soldiers at the military base. Would you like to attend?" Sarah accepted. On the day of the ceremony, Sarah saw Jackson in his uniform. For the first time in 15 years, he was wearing his military uniform. But this was different. He wore a training badge, not a combat one. Jackson addressed the young soldiers. "Dear soldiers, being here today is a great honor for me. Let me give you my most important advice. War isn't only fought with the enemy. Every moment of life, you also fight with yourself, with your fear, your doubt, your past." Sarah felt her eyes filling as she listened to Jackson's speech. "But remember, you're not alone. Your comrades beside you are your family. Protect them, trust them, draw strength from them." When the speech ended, the young soldiers gave Jackson a long applause. After the ceremony, Sarah and Jackson walked outside. "Jackson, I'm so proud. Marcus and David would be proud too." Jackson smiled. "Sarah, if you hadn't found that photograph that day, I would still be running from my past." "Maybe the photograph falling wasn't an accident," Sarah said. "Maybe Marcus and David's spirit guided you to this." Jackson liked this idea. "Maybe." Sarah looked at Jackson. "So what happens now? Now I'll continue training both my students and young soldiers. My past is no longer a burden, but a strength." Sarah nodded. "And maybe one day you'll consider writing your story." Jackson stopped and looked at Sarah. "Maybe, but for now, I'm focused on living." Epilogue. A story to be remembered. A year later, the hallways of Riverside High School still came alive with the same sounds. But now there was a different energy. Principal Jackson was no longer just disciplined, but also inspiring. Sarah still taught there, and her friendship with Jackson continued. Sometimes she would visit Jackson's office and listen to his new stories. One day, when Sarah entered the teacher's lounge, she noticed something new in place of the old photograph. Jackson had put a small frame on his desk. Inside was a photograph of Marcus and David. Below it was an inscription, "Never to be forgotten." Sarah smiled. Jackson had made peace with his past. That night on her way home, Sarah thought about this story. How many Jacksons were there around us? Silent, secret heroes. People carrying the pain of the past but fighting for the future. Sarah knew she would never forget Jackson's story. And maybe one day, she would share this story with others too. Because the stories of real heroes shouldn't be forgotten. As Jackson said, real warriors don't boast, they just serve. But sometimes their stories need to be told, because these stories inspire other people, give them hope. And that's why Sarah would always remember the day she found that photograph with gratitude. Because that day, she didn't just discover Jackson's past. That day, she learned what real heroism was. Question for you. Have you ever noticed the silent heroes around you? Have you been curious about their stories? Share with us in the comments. And if this story touched you, subscribe and help ensure these stories are never forgotten. At Human Stories, we remember forgotten legends. Because every person is a story, and every story deserves to be remembered. Until we meet in our next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest heroes hide in the most ordinary places.